right, welcome back. My name's Adrian.
My name's Aaron.
And this is 2teachone.
2teachone.
What are we talking about today? Actually, yeah. What did we do since the last podcast with Vinny?
So the last podcast, right, with Vinny?
Yeah.
Really, that's about it. We've done some studying and getting prepared for this one.
That's right.
It was a really good interview with Vinny. I was really happy that he came on.
Absolutely.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to see that and what we recorded with our videographer in-house, our friend Sam, she's a little tired today, so she's just not having it at all. But you know what? We're still happy to have her. If you want to watch, her short interview just introducing herself, feel free to do so. You'll be able to find it here soon at www.2teachone.com. That's www, the number 2, TEACH, number 1.com. You can also find that on Facebook. We'll have some clips on Instagram as well. But you'll be able to find that mostly on YouTube. So look out for that. Like us on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll be able to get a notification of when that happens.
Yeah, please do that.
Yeah.
Makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. And we're just so thankful to everyone. I don't know if, just in case you're joining us for the first time this time, welcome. And, we basically talk about health and wellness, topics, try and make them a little bit simpler, relaxed, fun, informative. We're very glad to have you. To all those people that have liked us on Facebook, which that number has actually increased quite a bit since the last time we
I believe we're at 104. 105.
105.
Sounds like a radio station. Welcome to 2teachone 105.
Yeah, man. So let's keep it going.
Okay.
Let your mom know, let your cousin know, let your get the cat to
Seriously.
like us on Facebook.
Call Aunt Sally. Let her know what's
Aunt
going
Sally,
down.
Grandma.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Just let everyone know.
TT.
Who?
TT.
I don't know who that is, but they sound nice.
Yeah, it's like an older female relative, right?
Okay, cool.
Like I had a Mimi,
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, yeah, let them all know.
Let
like
Mimi
us on
know.
Facebook and on
TT,
Instagram.
yeah, absolutely.
And add us on, subscribe to our channel on YouTube.
On the YouTubes.
We'll definitely be making an announcement about that as soon as we have that up.
Yeah, on the internets.
On the interwebs.
Yes.
Yeah, man.
Things running through tubes and wires and whatnots.
That's right.
Yeah, I hear it's going to be big. I think this internet, I'm just making a bold prediction.
It's huge.
I think it's going to go places.
Yeah. So definitely join us online, listen to the podcast wherever you listen, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify,
All
Apple
of them.
Podcasts.
Yeah.
Just search us, 2teachone.
2teachone. And if you search us on Google, I believe we are still
The number 1.
number 1. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great name. We
Oh,
just
yeah.
kind of landed on that one.
Yeah, well, it was all Adrian. I gotta let you know. 2teachone. That was all Adrian.
Yeah, I consulted with you.
Yes, no. I helped in the creative process. I like to think
Absolutely.
I primed the juices.
Yeah. So we talked about Vinny's episode, which was number 16. We spoke a little bit more. We had him come on and tell his story,
Yeah, it was really cool.
and that was really cool. I got to know him a little bit more, which was fun.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, great guy. And so, what are we doing today? Something a little bit different, right?
So, yeah, we are going to expand our horizons a little bit, right? And even though we've been talking about some current stuff with health and wellness, we focused on some addiction issues. We've talked about going to the gym. We've even dealt with some mental health with death and dying and the grieving process.
Right,
and
grief and
cancer.
loss. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we are actually going to go in a slightly different direction and talk about some history, right? We're going to talk about some medical history, and specifically, we're going to talk about battlefield medicine. Right?
Interesting.
So war, for better or for worse, has always been a part of human society.
Right.
And along with war, the whole point being to kind of, take out the enemy, injury, right? So injury is a huge part.
Right.
And especially in, times before we know what we know now, right? So current day, we know things like germs.
Right.
We're familiar with hand washing, You know, these are things we take for granted. But there was a time when people just didn't view the world through that lens, right? And so a lot of these things that we take for granted were developed. Well, in fact, all of them. At some point, the first guy was like, hey, let me take these reeds, tie it between these sticks, and I can carry this guy who can't walk. Bam, that guy invented the stretcher. It happened.
Is that how it happened?
Yes. Yes, it was.
Are we going to touch on that?
Okay, technically no. Right.
Technically, okay, cool.
They're not really sure of like the dude that invented the stretcher. or the lady. I'm just.
I was totally buying into that story, by the way.
It's cool, but you figure you could kind of assume like one day they're carrying this guy, and some genius of the tribe is like, "Hey, you know what, man? This guy's really heavy, so I'm gonna take some sticks, and we're gonna put these really strong reeds in between him, and then like we're all gonna carry him."
I'm looking it up. I just want to know when. Maybe not the story, right? But when the stretcher was invented.
Yeah.
It's pretty old, though.
It's pretty old. Yeah, like the stretcher's been around for a minute. I mean, as far as I know, right? What I can, we talk about a lot of different medical inventions. And,
right.
And it's kind of fascinating because, and it's a surprise reveal, so you have to listen for it.
Okay.
But there is a shocking fact about battlefield medicine that most people may not know.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Side note, before we continue.
Yes.
I was looking up when the stretcher was invented, and it just says in the 1930s. So it says the first usage of the term for a wheeled stretcher is unclear, but it is believed to have been derived from Pacific Coast slang.
Hold on, but see that's the wheeled stretcher? Like that's different. When we think of stretcher, we're actually just talking about dudes carrying people. Like the wheeled stretcher, yeah, and like the terminology that we use is definitely different. But the whole idea of the stretcher.
Right. So just two sticks, something in the middle.
Yeah.
And maybe there wasn't even like, really anything in the middle because it's a little graphic.
Yeah.
I don't know what this dude's sitting on.
Yeah, like, I don't know, right? That looks like, I don't know. I don't know, like 18th century or something? I don't know. Fascinating stuff, though. And so it's one of those topics that fits in line with, what we do, and yet that not a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is kind of fascinating. And I think a lot of it has to do with we don't like the idea, too, when we don't want to think about our military, getting injured, right? But it happens, and you have to deal with it.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm just going to dive on in. What do you think?
All right, where are we going to start?
Well, so we were talking about stretchers.
Right.
Right? But ambulances, right? So the first ambulances are going to be obviously not the kind that we think of today, right?
Yeah, you mean the ones that we hear constantly since we live downtown?
Yes. 24/7 ambulances.
Yeah. The soundtrack to my life for the last 7 years.
Yeah. You just get immune to them. And it's funny because you'll hear them on the street and I'll see people like cover their ears and I'm just like, yeah, whatever, amateur.
Right.
Like cover your ears.
Wow.
And I used to like do things like when I was a kid and even younger when I didn't see them that often, I would like wave to show my appreciation.
Right.
And I feel kind of bad. Not that I don't appreciate them. Thank you very much to all our first responders. But you get so used to it, you're like, yeah, there's a fire truck, there's an ambulance. Cool.
You were waving?
Oh, yeah. There was a time when I waved. Yeah.
Man, that is just...
Like with the thumbs up.
Yeah, as a kid, that's...
Well, even as an adult.
Even as an adult?
Because I grew up in the suburbs. We didn't see ambulances that often. In fact, when I lived in Texas, we had a volunteer fire department. So if you saw the fire department, they generally, you might know them.
It was Steve from next door.
Right. And you were like appreciative, like, thanks for taking the time to go fight that fire, man.
That's cool, yeah.
Yeah. But here, it's just so routine.
I know, yeah. Yeah, true.
And they're even like, you can watch them. And they're like, yeah, it's another day. About to go fight some fire. Right?
Yeah.
And especially where we live, I'm sure they get more of their fair share where they're kind of like, these are not the best utilization of my skill set. I'm just assuming. Because if you're trained to like go in there and like rescue people and put out fires and every 15 minutes there's a guy doing what he does
right. It happens.
On the street corner, you might be kind of like, all right, man.
Hey, but they do it, No,
sure. Yes.
It's all part of the service, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure that they would tell you that.
So, the ambulance.
Ambulance, yes. So, Technically, an ambulance is simply a vehicle dedicated to the purpose of transporting sick people.
Okay.
Right? And so instead of just treating people like where they lay on the battlefield, the idea of kind of collecting them into which, we're going to assume, horse-drawn carts, right? Specifically outlined for that purpose.
Okay.
This was first done by Spanish soldiers at the Siege of Malaga in 1487.
In España?
España.
Okay.
Sí. And it's, it's one of those things that there's not a lot of information about, but it's the first recorded thing where somebody was like, hey, let's put all these injured people in this thing and get them away from the battlefield.
Okay.
Right. So we're going to move on from there to something a little more interesting, right? So we're going to take it to 1537, right? To the Siege of Turin, which is in Italy.
Okay.
And
there's a lot of sieges.
Oh, yeah. Well, because back in the day, that was how they did warfare, right? Modern battlefield warfare, where, maneuvering units didn't really come into play like we think of it until World War II.
Okay.
Right. So, and there was always this give and take between offensive maneuverability and then defensive strongholds. Right. So,
okay.
It's kind of interesting. And so that went back and forth as new siege techniques were developed and then new defensive fortifications were developed.
Okay. So back to Turin.
Okay. So there is this gentleman named Ambrose Pare. I believe I'm saying that correctly. Who was a French barber surgeon.
Okay.
Not a term that we use today. Right? The barber field and the surgeon field completely separate today, right? They don't they don't coexist.
There's no like crossover.
Very rarely do you encounter a doctor that offers to give you a haircut.
Well, yeah, I mean if they're going to that the only time there's crossover that I know of is when they're about to do surgery, right? Correct. If there's some hair around the area, there's a surgery site.
Yeah.
They shave it off. That's it.
Yeah, but see, back in the day, the barber, like that's where that red and white thing comes from.
Yes, because it was the rags, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And that was back in a time, too, where they still believed that, controlled bleeding was sometimes a really good idea to, like, release the bad humors in the blood. Again, this is before germ theory. This is before people understood what caused disease.
Right.
So they were kind of operating from a completely different mindset.
Yeah.
But they were still intelligent people, and this story of Mr. Ambrose will show that, right? So he's caring for sick people who were injured in the Battle of Turin. And up until this time, what was believed was that gunpowder actually infected the wound, so that the gunpowder would poison the wound. And the only way to get that out, they believed, was by the use of boiling oil. So, you've been shot. They take you to the hospital, quote unquote.
Yes.
And they pour boiling oil on your gunshot wound. As you can imagine, painful. And this is... Yeah, no, right? Dude. I'm telling you, this is medicine, right?
Okay. It made total sense back then.
Yeah, that's what they thought, right? What's cool is this guy, so he's doing this.
This is a horror movie.
The barber surgeon, right, is pouring boiling oil on the gunshot wounds, and he runs out of oil, right? So what he notices is that... so I'm going to read a little bit of this. So he runs out of oil, and then this is kind of interesting. I'm going to quote here. At length my oil lacked, and I was constrained to apply in its place a digestive made of yolks of eggs, oil of roses, and turpentine. That night I could not sleep at my ease, fearing that by lack of cauterization I would find the wounded upon which I had not used the said oil dead from the poison. I raised myself very early to visit them, when beyond my hope I found those to whom I had applied the digestive medicament, feeling but little pain. Their wounds neither swollen nor inflamed, and having slept through the night. The others to whom I had applied the boiling oil were feverish, with much pain, and swelling about their wounds. See? So he was observant.
He was observant.
Those were his words.
Question.
Sure.
This was in Italy, right?
Yeah.
Why is he British? I just realized when you were speaking. But here's the thing. I was totally accepting of it. And they do it in movies too.
Yeah. Well, remember we were talking like the other day, side note, if you haven't watched Chernobyl, was that
Oh, dude, that was horrible.
Yeah, and they're all
Why
British.
are they all British?
Well,
There's something about the British accent, though, that's just
people
very...
just love it,
people
yeah.
just take to it, right?
It's like the greatest Soviet submarine captain was British.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dude, anyway, I digress. I
we'll
had to point that out, okay?
Yeah.
But yes, I accept him in his...
Yes.
Whatever,
Thank you.
accent he has.
Well, and
He's
what's
welcome.
funny is it's like he's French, so I don't know.
I'm so glad you did the British one instead then, because it would have gone weird, man, if you tried to do the French one.
Oui, no.
We would have had someone from France,
Yeah,
send us some hate mail.
Right, yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
So what's
Right,
interesting, so that there and then, he determined not to use any more of the boiling oil.
Yeah, because the people were doing well.
Yeah.
And he expected them to not have lived through the night.
Right, because surprisingly enough, pouring boiling oil on an open gunshot wound, not good for you.
It definitely raises stress levels, right? Because you're already hurt.
Yeah.
Now you've got boiling oil inside the gun, wound, the bullet wound.
Yeah.
And, raising stress levels. And I don't know, it just doesn't sound like it's good at all.
Well, and the whole idea, they used to believe in cauterization for, stopping blood loss.
Right.
Even when they didn't use boiling oil, they might use heat or something burning. We've seen that in movies.
Yeah, we've seen that. So,
But what's more effective is tourniquets, right? Just using a tourniquet, just stopping the bleeding. Like the body has a repair mechanism.
Right.
You don't necessarily, and you don't need to cauterize the wound like it's shown in movies. Like that's not actually effective.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure a doctor there might be some cases, but in general, right? If you're applying first aid, just use a tourniquet. Do not, I repeat, do not light something on fire and burn the wound closed.
There's extreme cases. I know
Sure.
the military have this, it's like this powder, right?
Yeah.
That they actually pour inside the wound, but they also use a tourniquet.
Yeah.
But you're talking about the kind of wounds that, I mean, even those measures with all that, doing tourniquet and some of that stuff, that's just to hopefully get you to hospital to get some real treatment. I mean, it's a severe, very emergency, type situation.
Yeah, and modern methods are fantastic, right? And we'll go through some of those figures in just a minute.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Okay, so they're moving on, right? So the next development isn't so much about technology as in procedure.
Okay.
So even today, let's say there's an emergency and a lot of people are injured. There's a process that they use called triage.
Okay.
That was actually developed during the Napoleonic Wars by Dominique Jean Lery, which is a cool name, right?
It is.
So he pioneered the idea of let's not wait till the end of the battle to use the ambulance, right? Which you would think, right? So in the middle of battle, he would put the guys in the ambulance and then take them away from the field and then perform this thing called triage. So in that, he would look at the wound or look at the injury and decide, okay, this person is easily fixed. So yes, we're going to get him, but he can wait, right? This person over here, we're not going to be able to fix him. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to waste our time even really trying. We're going to ease his comfort, ease his pain and let nature take its course. But then there's a person in the middle that may or may not make it, but there's a chance that you can save them, but they require immediate attention.
Right.
Right. So just that understanding of who we're going to spend our time trying to treat.
Right.
And
prioritizing, right?
Yes. And that process is called triage.
Gotcha.
And it's still in use today.
Yeah.
There's like three, and I just kind of went over them. So those that are likely to live regardless of what care they receive, those who are unlikely to live regardless of what care they receive, those for whom immediate care might make a positive difference, right? So those are the middle section.
Okay.
Right. And so that understanding, kind of revolutionizes things. Just this idea that it's not a first come, first serve, or before we get into the process of using what medicine they have, we're going to take a moment to classify and prioritize patients.
Right.
Right? So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
It's one of those things that we take for granted, and yet here's this guy who the first time was like, no, let's organize this.
Yeah, absolutely. When you go to the ER, that's the system that they,
Yes.
they have in place, which is why, as someone who was born with asthma, if I go into the ER and I'm having some breathing issues, sometimes I notice, depending on the severity, that I go in before someone that was sitting there.
Yeah, that happens a lot. You'll find people, and then people don't get it, and they'll be in there like, I don't understand. I've been here for like 4 hours.
Yes.
And, both of our mothers were a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
Are. And it's kind of interesting that, so we get it, right?
Yeah.
So we know, I might be here for 4 hours because I just like banged my thumb. Whereas
right.
somebody who comes in and they need immediate care, they're going to get that.
Exactly.
Okay, so the next advance that I want to talk about is, again, something that we don't really think about too often, but it's the idea of anesthesia, right? Mm-hmm. So there was this Russian, his name was Nikolai Ivanovich Pirogov. I believe I'm saying that correctly.
Okay.
And I'll spare you my Russian accent.
Thank you.
So he was one of the first surgeons, you're welcome, to use ether as an anesthetic in 1847. So this is during the Crimean War.
Okay.
Which, just from a historical perspective, is kind of the first modern war where you began to see wide-scale use of very powerful firearms. It's kind of leading into World War I, which would happen, I guess, about 50, 60 years later.
Okay.
So this gentleman began to use ether in the battlefield, right, to knock somebody out or to make them not feel pain so that they could do the surgeries that needed to get done, right? Before that, they would have to chloroform you, which isn't very effective, right? I know. And sneak up behind you with a rag.
No, not really. They'd just be like, okay, cool.
Yeah,
you ready?
Breathe into this. Yeah. Or, and sometimes that wasn't available, like the whole idea of knocking somebody out or giving them some medication before surgery was performed was relatively new. And you can only imagine what it was like before that.
Oh, man, they'd just be sawing off your leg, man. You're just fully present. Yeah. You pass out
from the pain.
For a few minutes. Yeah,
eventually,
from the pain, yeah.
Man, so it's kind of amazing. So that whole thing, and that grows as history goes, the different kinds of anesthetics and different methods that they use to numb pain so that they can do procedures effectively. So it just grows from there. So let me take you to the American Civil War, right?
Okay.
Which, again, we see an advance that is not so much in procedure, although these continue, right? We're slow. We haven't come to the Great Revolution that's going to happen a little between the Civil War and World War I as far as scientific understanding of disease. But what did happen was they put this gentleman named Jonathan Letterman, who was an American Civil War surgeon, in charge of battlefield medicine for the Union forces.
Okay.
And he's the first guy to develop an entire system. So now, at this point, you have men who are specifically brought in and trained. They're going to be ambulance guys, right? There's going to be an entire corps of physicians. There's going to be an entire corps of ambulances, field hospitals. And it's basically the same system that the American military still uses.
Yeah, with field medics. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it says by the time of the Battle of Antietam, which was one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War, Letterman has devised a system of forward first aid stations at the regiment level where principles of triage were first instituted. So it says, in other words, Letterman instituted standing operating procedures for the intake and subsequent treatment of war casualties, or for first time applied management principles to battlefield medicine, right? So instead of it just sort of taking place hodgepodge,
right,
he really organized the system.
There was process put into it.
Yeah. Which, people complain about the bureaucracy, but when used effectively, it's the way to roll, right?
Right.
And this kind of leads, so this whole idea of procedure leads to another idea, right? So instead of just relying on doctors in the rear, right, that you'll get the ambulances to at the field hospitals, why don't we teach every troop or every soldier, right, first aid? And this is like a wider movement that would later become where, like today, everyone is encouraged to learn first aid. I think, and even if you aren't certified, I think everybody knows some principles of first aid that they were taught, you know, don't move somebody, prop their legs up. So there's different things. If you've been certified at all, you'll know a little bit of first aid. Well, they didn't used to teach everyone that. And you have to understand this is in a time before really institutionalized and organized mass education took place.
Right.
So this is, back when you may not know how to read or write. And you could still be in society. You might have a job, but you just, you might not know how to read.
Right.
And so just the idea of teaching everybody like some basic first aid, enough where your buddy beside you, if you get hurt or shot,
right,
can perform some simple procedures that will save your life long enough to get you to the ambulance, which will then take you to the field hospital where the doctors will be. So it's kind of fascinating.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it completely is. Just to think about how many different processes and, inventions, a lot of this stuff was just, some of it was by mistake.
Sure.
You know
Yeah.
you know
like
what I'm saying?
Burning oil. That was
the
totally a
burning
mistake,
oil.
right?
That was a complete, he was just like, okay, I don't have this thing. Let me try this out, cause first there's a couple components to that. So, he needs to do something to like provide this person comfort, right?
Sure.
Now, even if he doesn't know that thing's going to work, he's like, okay, let me just do something so this person feels like, okay, I'm being taken care of.
Right.
Right. So maybe, perhaps the placebo effect, takes place there.
Right.
All the while, he's going to bed, he's thinking to himself, man, this dude's going to be dead in the morning.
Yeah.
Guess what?
Those were the guys that lived.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something you're going to talk about afterwards. We'll get
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
But
we'll get there.
But that was actually really amazing too.
The surprise reveal.
Yes. Indeed.
Right. So, first aid. So we're on first aid. And that's where they begin to teach just common everyday soldiers techniques that will allow people to get to the back lines where they can get their help.
Right.
So I want to go back a little bit.
Okay.
And this kind of leads into what we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. But I think most people are familiar with Florence Nightingale, right?
Yeah.
So if I say that name, she's kind of like the mother of nurses.
Yes,
right?
I certainly do because, like you mentioned, my mother's a nurse.
Yes.
Your mom was. We have plenty of nurses.
Yeah, and so she is actually famous for being at the Crimean War. So she gets this authorization to go to the Crimean theater of operations. And when she gets there, right, she just realizes that these conditions in these hospitals are what we would term horrendous.
Right.
Right. So I'll just, hygiene was neglected. Infections were rampant. There were no clean linens. The clothes were swarming with bugs, lice, fleas. Floors and walls and ceilings were filthy. Rats were hiding under the beds. No towels, basins, or soap. 14 baths for 2,000 soldiers. So that, that couldn't have smelled great.
Mm-hmm.
And this hospital, that's where the death count was the highest. So she starts there, right? And she simply just introduces hygiene. This simple idea of let's start with clean sheets. Let's get people baths. Let's, clear out the rodents. Let's get clean clothes. And just, even just the palliative effect, even just the effect of making somebody feel better.
Right.
Just from being in a cleaner condition.
Yes.
Really takes a toll.
Absolutely. Dude, have you ever... You know how you feel after just being all grody and on a hot day? Just imagine that effect, that's a big deal, especially if you're not feeling, particularly great. Just feeling clean and being in a clean environment.
Yes. I mean, absolutely. And it's kind of going into what we also know. See, this is still in a time when they didn't know, they knew it was better to be clean, right? But they didn't know exactly how important cleanliness was.
Yeah, that's true. People don't understand how gross things were in the past.
Well, and the fact that people just didn't know any better, right?
Yeah, that was the norm.
Yeah. So germs were not a concept that anybody knew about in 1854, right? So Florence Nightingale comes along, And she believed that the main problems were diet, dirt, and drains. So she brought food from England, cleaned up the kitchen, cleaned up the wards, a sanitary commission was established, and, really helped mortality.
Right.
People lived better, right? They didn't know exactly why yet, but they knew that it worked.
Right.
Right. And so they began to use it. This kind of takes us it's around this time, too, that there's another important development that just happens in warfare in general.
Okay.
So everyone's heard of the Geneva Conventions.
Yep.
Right. So these were brought about in 1864, right, when 16 European states adopted the first Geneva Conventions. And one of the big things was you could now, in your army, designate people who were only there to help the wounded.
Okay.
And they would not be fired upon by those countries practicing the Geneva Convention. So it's kind of a revolution in warfare where you're having people that say, yeah, I'm still going to shoot at you, but I'm not going to shoot at these guys over here as long as they're properly marked and they're only helping people live.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
Which is kind of funny if you think about it, in the sense of wouldn't you want to kill those people, but at the same time, very much a move forward as far as war goes. And obviously everybody would love it if there were no more war, but at least this limited who was going to be shot at. So this leads to the development of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent in Muslim countries. And they're still around today. So even people who don't respect a lot of things will respect the Red Cross on a Jeep or on a moving vehicle, as being, okay, this is full of people who are wounded. They're not, I should not fire on them, right? So
But that's also self-interest, though, right? Because it's not like only their, your adversaries' peeps, are getting wounded. Your guys are getting wounded too, and they need to be, carted off to safety also. So of course you want to honor, the code.
Sure.
Because you need it as well.
Exactly.
You might be the one in it.
Yeah. But it's still a big move forward, you know?
No, it's huge.
But yeah, you're right. There is some self-interest there, right?
Completely, yeah.
But it is kind of interesting that in the code, so you can be armed as a medic for self-protection. But the moment you use that offensively, you are no longer a medic in the eyes of the Geneva Conventions.
Really?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. A little tidbit, Of course, nowadays, when we're currently, the United States Army isn't involved in major land battles in the way of World War II and World War I.
Right.
We're fighting against, guerrillas, basically, people who understand they can't take on the army head first, so they fight in a different way. And they often do not respect the Geneva Conventions or what we would call the conventions of war.
Right.
It's kind of...
guerrilla war. That's how guerrilla warfare is.
Exactly, yeah. So, times have changed a little bit in that sense, but it's still, at least it's recognized by all the major nations now. So it's kind of interesting. This kind of takes us to the Spanish Civil War.
This is highly entertaining, by the way.
It's interesting, right?
No, thank you. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So just some small things happened during the Spanish Civil War, which happened right before, for those of you that don't know, it happened right before World War II. So Spain experienced the first successful kind of anarcho syndicalist revolution. It was a beacon for much of the left-wing thinking of the time. It was immediately opposed by the nationalists of Francisco Franco, who were supported by the Germans. Right, so it was kind of like a field test for a lot of the stuff that was going to happen in World War II. But one of the things that came out of it was a practical method for transportation of blood developed by Duran y Lloreda, and the technique of mixing the blood. Right, so if you had blood you were going to give to somebody,
right?
Again, they weren't exactly sure why, but they developed this technique of mixing it a little bit with the blood you were about to put in, right? So take a little bit of blood out from the guy, mix it with the blood you're going to put in, and then put it back in. That's the way I read it, right?
Okay.
And also, between, right, the end of the Civil War, right, and World War I, because we kind of skipped over that, but we're going to come back.
Right.
This major advancement happened. So we've all heard of Louis Pasteur, right?
I have.
The pasture.
Who is, yeah, as in pasteurizing.
Exactly.
The pasteurizing
right?
process.
So germ theory. So this was the first time anybody came up with a scientifically verifiable, right, idea for why diseases happened. These small microorganisms, right? So the advancement in microscopes and things happened. Germs, right? So this idea that what was causing disease was germs.
Right.
That what caused a wound to get infected, germs.
Right.
Right? And equally as important was a man that we all know, right? As his name is Lister, right? Listerine.
Lister
right?
as in Listerine.
Yes.
That's where that comes from.
Yeah, he actually, I don't have this written down, unfortunately, but I believe this is correct. And if I'm wrong, I want you to hop on 2teachone.com and tell me. But my understanding is that he worked in an obstetrics, is the way, like with babies.
Okay.
And he came up with a solution. And he was like, building on germ theory, if you will use this solution on your hands
Yes.
before you deliver a baby,
Yes.
let's see if we can cut the
number of deaths.
Yeah, sepsis
because
and stuff.
prior to that, they were very high, and
Yes.
they didn't realize that that was what was going on.
Yeah, because you're putting your hands in there's a great chance for germ transfer
Yes.
during the birth process.
Yes.
And he had them use this Listerine, if you will, and it cut down on sepsis like dramatically. But up until then, this idea, it's kind of funny because how we view the world is so often shaped by just our belief system, right? And the idea that a doctor or a nurse who is there to help could be the one transferring disease.
Right.
They were like, nah, that's not right. We're doctors. We're nurses. We don't transfer disease. We help disease.
Right.
But they were unknowingly doing it because they just weren't aware of the power of germs. And his solution and this idea of sanitation really catches on, right? And it starts to cut down dramatically, right? The number of deaths from after effects, right? From infections of all kinds, not just in battlefield medicine, but just in medicine in general, right?
Yeah.
So this takes me right to what I found. So when I'm doing this research, I do all this first part because my concentration is what happens when you get shot, what happens when you get stabbed, how did they develop that kind of things. And
Right.
a lot of the stuff is known for a long time. Like stitches have been around forever, right?
Yes.
Because it's a very clear idea. Let's sew this back up, right? So there's nobody who, even the stretcher, been around for a long time.
Right.
So that's why we kind of began with ambulances.
Right.
But, so here's a startling fact. So if I tell you, right, true or false, during the American Revolutionary War, out of 100 men that died, 90 of them would have died from diseases that they caught in camp. Would you say that was correct? Or would you say that was false?
Well, prior to this morning, I would have said, false. I mean, it's a possibility, but I had never fathomed that the number was that high.
Yeah.
That's most of them.
Most of them, yes.
Yeah, that is just, it's staggering, man.
Yeah.
Those numbers are
amazingly
very,
high.
very high. Yeah.
There are 2 periods of warfare, right? So everything up until around 1918, right?
Okay.
Around World War I. Every war, every single one
Yeah.
that was ever fought, more people died from things like dysentery, typhoid, diseases that you catch living next to hundreds of or thousands of men who didn't understand what germs were and had no access to basic sanitation. That's where people died, right? That's the major killer of all military personnel up until that time, up until around 1918, was disease.
Wow.
Yeah. It's amazing. So here's some of these facts. So it says, throughout America's first 145 years of war, far more of the country's military personnel perished from infectious diseases than from enemy action. This enduring feature of war was finally reversed in World War II. chiefly as a result of major medical advances in prevention, which are vaccines, and treatment, antibiotics. Safeguarding the health of a command is indispensable for the success of any campaign. Wars are lost by disease, which causes an enormous drain on the military's resources and affects both strategy and tactics. Disease and combat mortality data from America's principal wars, 1775 to the present, fall into two clearly defined time periods. The disease era, 1775 to 1918, during which infectious diseases were the major killer of America's armed forces, and the trauma era, 1941 to present, in which combat-related fatalities predominated. The trend established in World War II continues to this present day, right? So I read all that so we could begin to talk about how the idea of germs and the idea of sanitation just revolutionized what it meant to even have battlefield medicine, right?
Okay.
Because it's kind of interesting, so before you could start a military campaign, you had to bring your army together.
Right.
So you had to have thousands of people living in close proximity, which brings with it a lot of, let's just say it, Poop.
Yep.
And not understanding that living that close to poop will give you things like typhoid, will give you diseases. People would just die waiting to just leave to go kill other people.
Right.
I mean, it was amazing. Some of these figures are just crazy. So in the American Civil War, 2/3 of the estimated 660,000 people that died were caused by pneumonia, typhoid, dysentery, and malaria. And they say that this death toll led to a 2-year extension of the war, and these diseases were known as the Third Army, right? So,
wow.
So many people were sick and injured and dying,
right?
They couldn't even conduct effective military campaigns. And it's one of those things I had never read about. And I consider myself a bit of a history buff. Like if you wanted to talk about the causes and the reasons of the Civil War and the famous battles and the generals, I'm with you, right? Side note, it's amazing how much of our present American language comes from the Civil War, right?
Right.
But it's a whole other topic. But what I mean by that is I thought I was pretty well versed, right, in the history of warfare and the history of especially American warfare.
Right. So
I was not.
I wonder what that looks like nowadays. What are those numbers like? How is that translated into modern times?
Right. So I actually have some of those numbers. And then I'll give you some more like fascinating numbers about just wars that we know about. Right. So this is interesting. So let me read a little bit of this, and you'll pardon me if you hear me switching my notes around.
Through the pages.
I have basically a book here that I'm
book
putting
report.
together. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to read this. It says, until well into the 20th century, disease, rather than effects of enemy weapons, was the single most important producer of casualties. So here's where I get this figure I mentioned earlier. In the Revolutionary War, 90 out of every 100 deaths were due to disease. As late as 1865, more soldiers died from disease, shock, or secondary infection of wounds than died from direct effects of weapons, even in Vietnam. 75% of all hospital admissions were for the treatment of disease rather than wounds. However, the effect of progress in preventive medicine and the treatment of disease on the survival rates of sick and wounded soldiers was profound. So here's where we get into some figures.
Right.
So in the Mexican-American War, the rate of death from disease was 103.9 per 1,000 men. The rate fell to 71.4 per 1,000 in the Civil War, and then to 34 per 1,000 in the Spanish-American War. In World War I, the rate was only 16.5 per 1,000, and in World War II, it fell to just 0.6 per 1,000.
Wow.
So by World War II, modern methods of sanitation were understood.
Yes.
Modern methods of hygiene were understood and accepted. And it's kind of interesting because by this time we moved to a society in America where regular bathing was considered what you do.
Right.
Where we had moved, have you ever seen those funny old laws? People will talk about how in Texas, you can only take a bath during the winter months, or if you take a bath during the winter months, it can, like these laws are still in the books.
Right.
Where when people took a bath a couple times a year, like even our gym that we go to here in Denver was at one point a bathhouse.
Yes.
Meaning it was a place where you took a bath when you didn't have it in your house.
Mm-hmm.
So that, as a society, we began to understand what germs were. We began to develop antibiotics. We began to develop vaccines. Mm-hmm. We began to understand what disease was and how to fight it. So this transferred, and a lot of this came from advances and understandings that happened because they were able to study, the effects of having thousands of men living in a large area, right?
Yeah, and fighting the forces of poop.
Yes, for real.
It's a poop world, man, as we always say.
It is a poop world. Like, for those of you who think the world is clean, it's not clean.
You'd just be frightened if you knew how much poop you're surrounded by on a daily basis.
Yeah, you just want to get it to an acceptable level of poop.
Basically.
That's all it is. And just go with the flow. It's going to be all right.
You'll be okay.
Just wash your hands.
Yeah.
You're okay.
Yeah.
And
wash your hands.
And try not to know. Just it's kind of like it's like hot dogs.
They can't know it now.
Okay.
We've made them aware, and they've got Google at their disposal.
Oh no!
So don't
do it. Don't do it.
Yeah, it's not advisable to do it, man.
Did I tell you I planted a new hot dog tree in my backyard?
Oh, yeah, I can't wait.
It's right next to
bear fruit.
Yes, it's next to the bacon bushes.
Oh.
Yes, it's amazing.
Don't say bacon. After last night, I've just about had it.
Oh man, we ate so much meat.
Yeah.
Bacon wrapped this, and yes. Anyway, we digress.
So good.
So it was very entertaining for my tummy. So those are the statistics today. So like in the trauma era, like we talked about earlier, more people in the military now. If you are going to get injured, you're way more likely to get injured from enemy action or from an accident that happens because, you're doing just dangerous things.
Yeah.
Than you are from catching a disease because the latrines aren't cared for properly.
Right.
Like they've sort of mastered that.
Right.
And even, the organization that we talked about beginning with Letterman in the Civil War has developed into the MASH units. Like there's a TV show that was famous, right? Mobile Army Surgical Hospital.
Right.
They have really done a superb job of refining how they take care of the wounded and how quick they do. Like they use, like in Vietnam, they began to use helicopters. Mm-hmm. It's a defining feature of the war if you've ever watched any movies about it. But just the idea of getting the injured off the battlefield and to these hospitals that are close by as soon as possible. So organizationally, I mean, I don't know how much more improvement they can make. However, there's continual refinement all along, as far as technology and stuff. And so, I mean, the modern American military is as effective as you could probably be at taking care of the sick and wounded.
As far as that process goes, I wonder how much the terrain you're fighting in, how much of a difference that makes, right? Because obviously, in Vietnam, right, you're in the jungle.
Yeah.
There's certainly mosquitoes that can, bring, malaria, or, there's all these things going on. You drink the water from the wrong source, you get sick that way. So I think, that's probably, a decent factor. But like you said, technology has come so far. Now they have those straws that just filter out all kinds of, pathogens, bacteria, stuff like that, So yeah, it's a lot harder to, really get ill.
Yes. Although it does, it still happens, right? And understanding, and it's funny, like understanding that mosquitoes cause malaria is what enabled the Panama Canal to be built. Because people were falling out. People were getting sick. And once they started using pesticides, to kill off a bunch of mosquitoes, people were able to live longer. Yeah. And they were able to complete the Panama Canal, which was basically kind of a military project for America.
Pretty much.
Yeah. If you've never studied that history, it's kind of fascinating. Mm-hmm. Unless you're, Panamanian or Colombian, right? Because Panama was separated from Colombia so that the canal could be built. But that's like a whole nother episode. No. So I have these things that blew me away when I began to read them. Like I almost didn't believe it. Like I had to read it a few times, right? So let's think about this. So, everyone, I shouldn't assume. There was the largest pandemic, right? The largest and deadliest disease pandemic of the modern era was the Spanish influenza.
Right.
Which was actually largely, they think now, a viral pneumonia. Because it was resistant to antibiotics. And even back then, they weren't quite understanding about viruses, right? They had just sort of stumbled on what germs were and bacteria and antibiotics. They didn't have any antiviral medications. In fact, we don't have a lot of them today. Like the virus is one of the most effective life forms that exists.
Absolutely. It's just like the cold, man. You just have to weather the storm.
Yeah.
Even the medicine is only made to, alleviate symptoms.
Yes, in order to bolster your own body's defenses, right?
True.
And it's fascinating. So think about this. It says a lot of that, they believe now, was actually caused, like it developed from men living in close quarters, getting ready for the war or being in the war. Like that's where that influenza, that viral pneumonia began, and then it spread all over the world. And there's some truly outrageous figures. So it says in September and November of 1918, right? So America is about to enter the war. No, I think they had entered in 1917. Yeah. Influenza and pneumonia sickened 20 to 40% of the United States Army and Navy personnel. 20 to 40% of all the people in the Army and Navy.
Period.
Yes. Were sick. Very sick with like viral pneumonia and influenza.
Yeah, that's a high number considering that before that, the issue was, the lack of knowledge about germs and bacteria and having some of the things that would mitigate its, spreading, that kind of thing.
Yes.
So, but now of course we know the virus it's really tricky, right? Like for instance, like the cold. By the time you're symptomatic and trying to protect other people, it's too late.
It's too late.
You unknowingly hugged them and gave them all this love and the cold.
Yeah, the virus is smart.
Yeah, exactly. Just because it wants to survive.
Yes.
That's its number one, objective. So yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. So 20 to 40%.
Yeah. And it's interesting. The deadlier a virus is, it doesn't survive because its host doesn't survive. So like the cold been around forever because it's not deadly.
Right.
Usually, right?
Right. Yeah. Very few cases. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's able, like you live through it and then you pass it on to somebody else. Right. It's very interesting. So, I just wanted to point out just some very interesting figures. So we've all, or you may be familiar with, Napoleon, right? Great French general.
Bonaparte.
Right. His undoing was, of course, trying to start a major land war in Asia by trying to go conquer Russia, right? Which, we've seen the downfall of a couple different armies. And you read that he left with the Grand Army, right, of 500,000 men. Well, dysentery, typhus, and pneumonia killed 450,000 of those men, right?
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely stunning that people would even attempt to try to put together an army, right? I mean, it floors me that would be a figure that's accurate.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, with all their might and resources, right? You'd think that they may be curious about looking at past wars and what took them down, right?
Yeah.
How come this is a trend? How can we break that, right? So that we can arrive with enough men to, decimate.
Well, and what's interesting, there were people always thinking about that. And that's how we get these advances. But it wasn't always, the generals didn't want to hear it. They're like, let's get together as many men as we can and go march on this place.
They're thinking about, numbers and force, right?
Yes, and it's all in the way that we understand the world. So we, looking back, understand germs and understand sanitation. They didn't even think about it.
Right.
It wasn't even a deal for them. So they're like, they don't know why all these men got sick, but it's not going to happen to us, right? Because we're on the good mission. these guys got sick. They probably didn't do the right rituals. They probably didn't say the right prayers.
Right.
They probably, the gods didn't like them.
And that's interesting because it's a spiritual component.
Yes.
Based on the time, that was a really big deal.
Super big deal. If they thought God was on their side.
Yeah.
I mean, these people got sick, again, like I said, because God wasn't on their side. They didn't have an understanding of germs and sanitation, so it never even entered their mind that the cause might actually just be the camp itself, right?
Yeah. Germs.
They just didn't think about it. And so,
wow.
Yeah, so it begins in the World War I, right? With that influenza. And people they've understood what germs were.
Right.
And they begin to see the effects. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where the revolution begins to take place, because all the wars fought after that, at least American wars, right? More people passed away from actually getting injured in combat, right?
Right.
Whereas all the wars before that, vastly more people died from the camps themselves, from just being in the army and living that close to other people. And It all changes with understanding sanitation and germs, right?
Right.
And it's just amazing that of all these massive armies that these people have fielded throughout the years that we read about in history books, and we read about these fantastic battles and these amazing feats of heroism and genius of military commanders, that the number one killer of all of these armies was this tiny microscopic thing.
Oh yeah, man.
Called the germ.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It's the little things in life.
Yeah. I mean, and there's all these really interesting little stories, right? So, during the Civil War, and I mentioned this to you the other day, there was this very interesting phenomenon that people noticed where some of these wounds would glow.
Right.
Right? And the people that had the glowing wounds lived.
Uh-huh.
Or the majority of them, right?
Yeah.
And not understanding germs or anything like that, they were like, this is odd. This is like a miracle of some kind, right?
Right.
So cut to the 21st century. This actually is done, I believe, by somebody in school. I don't know if it was college or high school. They actually were interested in this story and began to do the research. And what they came to understand and showed through, scientific process, that kind of thing, that what they were dealing with was a certain bacteria that would get into the wounds.
It was algae, or wasn't it?
It's something like that.
Did you say algae, or is it it's some type of bacteria?
Yeah, it was bioluminescent.
Right.
Right? And it had gotten into the wounds because they were down in the muck and the dirt. And just like some germs are bad for you, some germs are good.
Right.
And this was a germ that actually ate away at some of the dead tissue in wounds that might cause gangrene and other infection. And so because they accidentally got this bacteria in their wounds that glowed, they lived because the bacteria ate away the stuff that would have killed them. So it's just fascinating,
Yeah, so I looked it up on Google,
Oh,
right?
cool.
And so it says, as the sun went down after the 1862 Battle of Shiloh during the Civil War, some soldiers noticed that their wounds were glowing a faint blue. Once they were taken to field hospitals, the troops with glowing wounds were more likely to survive injuries and to get better faster. And so, yeah, it was some type of bacteria. And some of the pictures that, I'm seeing here, that's interesting. I'd be freaking out.
Right?
If there was this kind of glow coming from my arm.
What is going on?
Yeah, this little graphic over here, this dude, the way he's looking at his arm, and the lady's like,
Right?
dude, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Fascinating stuff, right? So there's all these little stories where people didn't really understand what was going on.
Yeah.
And just the revolution, of science. So the practical application comes from people observing their environment. So we'll take it all the way back to Ambrose, right? So even though he didn't understand germs,
Right.
he didn't understand much of anything as far as we would think about medicine. What he was able to do was use his intelligence and his observation skills.
Right.
And so through sheer chance and luck, he observed that what he was doing previously didn't work.
Right.
And he was scientifically minded enough, right, to be open-minded to the idea that what he was doing didn't work. And so he was able to see, this doesn't work. This over here seems to work better. So I'm not going to stand on tradition or principle.
Right.
And this idea, I'm going to try to save these lives.
Right.
And this appears to be more effective, so we're going to do that. And that led to a revolution. People stopped putting boiling oil in gunshot wounds.
Yeah, that's ridiculous, man.
Right?
I'm not sure how that became a good idea. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how that was supposed to work. The heat thing,
right?
I kind of get it, right? Just burn the surface, right? And kind of create a barrier. So that I get. It burns the germs, whatever, all that, right?
Yeah.
Oil?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's just torture.
Yeah.
At least the way
way we
I'm
think of
seeing it. Yeah, exactly.
But again, we view the world through a modern lens.
That's
you
just
can
privileged.
Yes, you can't take away the fact that we understand. Even and it's interesting because neither of us are scientists by trade.
Right.
Neither of us are studied biology in college.
True.
Neither of us really took much I took some science in college. I took plant biology for non-science majors.
Okay.
So I learned a little bit, but just growing up and like going to 8th grade, you'll learn about germs.
Yeah, man.
What was once absolutely revolutionary and on the forefront of scientific knowledge is now something that school children know.
Yeah, just commonplace.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. And in that sense, that gives me hope, right? So even though war is still a thing, even though we haven't solved all the social issues of our day, or just the human condition,
right?
Progress.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we're so privileged to be where we're at, especially when it comes to information. I just pulled up all this stuff on my phone.
Yeah.
Now that said, okay, I think that so there's this whole idea of just knowing enough to be dangerous, right? So, you spoke about, every family, every home needing to have some kind of basic knowledge of first aid.
True.
Right. And it's so important. I'm always joking with my dad because, he likes to be, I think, he's a prepper, man. He's a prepper, not in the full on sense, but he really values self-sufficiency and, having, planning and that kind of thing, you have to get a good go bag in place.
Yes,
and, just basic knowledge of how to use some, basic things in that bag. Actually, I think last time I went, I took him one of those field tourniquets. There you go. Just a few knickknacks for the bag. In case you need to grab a bag and take off. Maybe there's unrest. Who knows? All these things are definitely possible. We should not be lulled into a false sense of security by any means. But yeah, just basic knowledge is good. For instance, we should be doing some kind of refresher course. I don't know if you are certified CPR.
No, not currently. I have been in the past, but I'm not now.
Okay. So I think we're going to be doing a refresher at work sometime soon.
Well, and it's fascinating because I've been certified twice now.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating was what had changed from the first time I was certified to the second time.
I know, right? Time, well, and because of modern times, right? There's access to information.
Right.
And there's a lot more research and all these things happening that we're getting new information faster. Things are changing.
Yeah.
Oh, guys, by the way, remember that thing we were doing?
We're not doing that.
It's silly.
Yeah, don't do it that way.
Don't do
anymore.
that.
Yeah, do it this way now.
Yeah.
We found this to be more effective. And that's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Right? It forces you to stay on top of your game, but it also indicates that people are paying attention and that progress is being made.
Yeah.
Because you always want to be more effective when you're trying to help somebody out of a dangerous situation.
Yeah, for sure. Based on the conversation we've had, first of all, it's really fascinating to see, where things were and how it's, really informed some of the things we're doing today.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I think some of the lessons I've taken from this is, it's good to be observant, first of all.
Sure.
Okay. Cause let's just agree that, being observant was a big part of, all the advancements that we've talked about, things that happened.
Yes.
So being observant, definitely, taking the time to figure out process, to know what you should do. Should something, go wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at the very basic. So I think everyone should, try and figure that out for you and your family at home, right?
Yeah.
Or even if it's just you, having that knowledge is really important. And it's so easy to access information now that why not?
Well, and I think it's interesting too, is the whole point of our podcast is to sort of decipher the massive amount of information that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
To simplify what has become complex.
Exactly.
Where we've gone from a situation where there was not enough knowledge.
Exactly. Now there's too much. You're polarized. Yeah, you're just
right? I know. You pull up something on Google, you're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And so our mission or our goal and what we want to do is to simplify those things.
Exactly.
And so that we kind of do some of the background research and bring it to you in a more simplified form so that it's more accessible. Yeah. And I think we should maybe look at doing some kind of first aid podcast. I don't know. It just kind of occurred to me. Something along those lines. It might be interesting.
Yeah, we can definitely look into that and see how to present it to people.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea, especially maybe for YouTube, because that's something that we're going to be,
right?
Launching here soon. So something to think about.
Absolutely. You can, I'll hit you. No, you can hit me with the baseball bat, and then, Sam can apply some simple first aid.
Why did you decide that it was me hitting you with the baseball bat?
Well, because I was going to hit you with the baseball bat, and I thought, well, that seems wrong. So since I'm saying it, I'll make the joke about me. That way it doesn't, make one of those tiny baseball bats, which, just as a side note, I think are awesome.
How about we just use a wiffle bat, and then you can just pretend, you can act to be injured.
Okay, I'll do that. Well, it probably sounds better.
All right. Yeah, because, it's very hard to enjoy some omelet after, you've just been injured.
With a giant bat.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah. Okay. So, for those of you who are listening, we decided not to hit each other with bats. Okay. I also recommend, and this is very important at home, that you do not hit anyone with a bat.
Absolutely not.
Unless it's like a burglar.
In which case, we're not saying that you should.
Right.
But if you feel that's what you need to do in the moment, feel free.
Yeah. And, maybe don't aim for the head. Just maybe take out a leg.
Yeah.
Repair that a little bit easier.
It's not about, killing. It's about incapacitation.
Exactly.
And why did this just turn into a self-defense?
I don't really know how I'm not sure.
It's it's okay. We mean well.
Yeah.
Either way, definitely figure out how to put some things in place at home, so you guys can take care of each other. Have a first aid box. That's a big deal.
Yes.
Have it stocked. And just learn some things, here and there.
Yeah. I also encourage you, if you do own a weapon for self-defense.
Yeah.
To learn how to use it effectively, right? Because that's important. And learn some of the first aid techniques that you might need to know around that weapon and stuff.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Just be prepared and avail yourself of the scientific knowledge that our race and our kind or people, humanity, has put together over the last couple thousand years.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe we should have someone come in and talk about, so we're talking about first aid in the sense that, a modern first aid, kit, aid kit with, all the, expected things, Band-Aids, Neosporin, blah, blah, blah.
Sure, right.
But what about a natural, approach, a holistic, natural, some herbs, some, how about we bring someone in to talk about that? You know what I'm saying?
That could be interesting.
Yeah, rosemary, mint, all these things can be used.
Well, that's one of those interesting things that, like when we talked about the gentleman earlier, right? He knew, and this is a knowledge that I don't possess.
Yeah, I know the eggs and what else? And oil of roses.
Yeah, so they knew which herbs to use. Yeah. As far as would be antiseptic, even though they didn't understand what antiseptic was, they still knew which herbs were effective through trial and error.
But that was ancient knowledge.
Yes, that just got passed down.
That had been passed down,
And now it's Neosporin.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with Neosporin, but if there was no Neosporin available, what would you do?
What can you use?
Yeah. So I think that's a super good idea. Let's do that.
I think we should get someone in to talk about that.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I wish my dad was closer because he was talking to me yesterday and he was telling me that he just took inventory of his herbs, his little stash.
Nice.
And he's like, dude, this is crazy. But he's glad he has them because, he's got the knowledge and now the means, as far as, the materials he needs to, just make some natural medicine, man.
I've only spoken with him once. I'm a fan. It's very interesting. Adrian's dad is one of those gentlemen that I literally sat up straighter just speaking on the phone to him. Like, it was just something about the way he spoke. I was like, okay, I'm going to sit up a little bit straighter. Yes, sir.
You need to adjust real quick.
Yeah, he sounds like a fascinating human being.
Oh, man.
And I think we get along great.
He is.
We have some stuff in common.
He is. Yeah, you guys would definitely get along.
Yeah. So hopefully someday I get to meet him.
So in summary.
Yeah.
Is there anything that, we'd like to say before we close this one out?
Well, in summary, I'd just like to send out a shout of support to all the men and women who have dedicated their lives and their service to the military.
Absolutely. Our friends, our close friends.
Yes.
Some of them are our close friends, and
veterans,
family.
Yes. And, what they've given up to be of service is sometimes great. And we just want to honor that, especially... just going to mention their names, Serena and Locke.
Yeah.
I think are two that we know very well.
Absolutely.
And we're proud to call them fans of the podcast.
Yeah, my buddy Will is serving currently.
Nice. Yeah. And we have one of our counselors, her husband served.
Absolutely.
So, you see these people every day, and we often don't take the time to say thanks, and we just would like to throw a shout out. And also to the men and women throughout history who've just taken the time to be observant, who've used intellect and knowledge and
ingenuity.
Yes, to advance the cause of saving people's lives.
Absolutely. And to the nurses, because we have, they're very near and dear to us. My aunt, my mother, other friends and family, you know, we appreciate you guys, and we certainly, can relate to what you're doing,
Absolutely.
We too, in our profession, we're with people when they're at their worst.
Yeah.
Not that they're bad people. They're just in a bad spot.
Yeah.
And so, it's an honor to be able to help people through times like that.
Really
it's not easy, but it's definitely an honor.
Yes. So just all around, thank you.
Thank you very much. So to all the listeners also, we hope you've enjoyed. If you've listened up to this point, we appreciate the support. If you didn't listen up to this point, we still appreciate all of the support. We just decided to try something new this time. Let us know what you think about this episode, and should we continue to produce episodes like this from time to time to break up, the monotony of what we usually do, which is great, but some of the topics are really heavy.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I really enjoyed it, and I'd like to do something similar again.
Well, great. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I was also very entertained. I know you like to do this kind of thing, so I'm happy that you like it. So yeah, if you liked this, please feel free to let us know. Send us some message through Instagram or Facebook. Mm-hmm. You can reach us there at TWOTEACHONE. That's Instagram and Facebook. That's our handle. If you'd like to email us through the website, feel free to do so. The address is www.2teachone.com. That's www, the number 2, TEACH1.com. Or Google us and you'll find everything. You'll find us wherever wherever you prefer, really.
And wherever you Google.
Yeah, just Google, and we're all up in that bad mama jamma. Oh man. So this is really great. Thanks for listening again. Yes. Like us on Facebook. Please. And Instagram. I'll just keep saying that. Please.
Yeah. And, I'm going to shout out again, join our community, because what we're trying to do here at 2teachone is not just produce a podcast.
No.
Right? We're not just trying to get listeners so that we can monetize, although we'd like it to be self-supporting. But what we're trying to do is create a community of people who are dedicated to the cause of learning more about what health and wellness is.
Right.
And, being more cognizant of health and wellness, and then applying that in their own lives. And we need your help, because it's just two of us.
That's true.
And to create a community, you need lots of people with lots of diverse viewpoints and who know a lot of things that we don't know. And we'd like you to contribute. We'd like to hear what you think. We might even like to have you on the podcast.
Absolutely. If you have something to say, if you have just a rant, if you're a professional, if you feel that you have something to offer, feel free to email us through the website. Just let us know what you're thinking. We'd love to have, people on that, have something to say.
Absolutely. That's what we're here to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're here to, providing this platform. And, correction. It's not just the two of us. We've got Sam here.
Oh, that's true. I'm sorry, Sam.
I just like to video Sam while she's videoing me.
It's very meta to video the videographer as she's videoing.
Yeah, just real quick, just for the gram. What's up, Sam? Yes. Oh, dude, Sam loves being on camera.
Oh yeah,
she's super tired today.
She's super tired.
But she's still smiling though, and we appreciate her efforts.
And putting up with both of us is no easy task. But she seems to be taking it quite well. I think it's a good match.
Yeah. So with that, we're gonna close this one out. Thanks for listening, and we will see you for episode
17.
This is 17.
No, 17, 18. Oh, they got me.
Got you.
You did.
For once.
All right.
All right. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.